Now, the 2024 to 2027 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and FSP have just been submitted to the Senate, like we saw in that particular background. This new document is also expected to guide the preparation of the 2025 budget. This is as the Federal Executive Council is considering a proposed budget of 47.9 trillion naira for the 2025 fiscal year, representing a 35% increase from the 2024 total budget. To discuss this and what it means for the Nigerian economy is Chinedu Bassey. He's the immediate past national coordinator and now member of the Tax, Justice and Governance platform. He's a fiscal justice analyst. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great. You've been on location from one forum to the other, educating Nigerians on the need to understand government policies and government programs, and also giving the government feedback of what the people think. Now, talking about the medium-term expenditure framework, which includes projections for key macroeconomic parameters such as oil price benchmark, oil production, we have the exchange rate, we have inflation and GDP growth rate. Now, how would present realities reflect a proposed 47.9 trillion naira budget in terms of revenue?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And like you mentioned, present realities. That's the underscoring issue that really affects whatever thing that is happening within the fiscal landscape in Nigeria. There's a lot of uncertainties. Like you rightly mentioned, the MTEF document and FSP had been submitted. And just to mention that within the time when that document was prepared and now that it was submitted to the National Assembly for approval, a lot has changed, and that's a very, very poor background for planning, whether it's even in the immediate short term or talk about the medium. So we are talking about the medium-term expenditure framework, and within few months, you have so much that has changed. You have a inflation rate variation had changed. You have the value of the naira that we are talking about dwindling, so it goes up and down within this specific frame of time. That's a very, will I say, dicey platform to plan with. It doesn't help for any specificity to come about in what we are looking at. So if we, as we know that the MTEF document is supposed to instruct the budget itself, and we have approximated how much we are going to make, judging from what the situation was at that particular time when the document was prepared. And here we are, a lot have
changed within this period. Okay, looking at these fluctuations in numbers as we plan forward, more so that it's just within this short span, we've seen changes like the exchange rate. We're looking at the exchange rate of 1,600 to a dollar, or like a 1,400 to a dollar for the projection for 2025. But as of yesterday at the close of transaction, we are seeing trading between 1,600 to 1,700. Yes, with all of this, would you agree with me, or what's your take in the aspect of government trying to ensure stability in all of these sectors, from oil production to the price of crude? Though Nigeria has no control over this, it's a global thing. What do you think can be done to ensure this stability so that these projections might be very close to reality as we're talking?
Yeah, so issues around destabilization have become a sing-song, I could say. Yeah, it's a lot that has been happening within that space, and somehow let me give kudos to the work that the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Reforms and Tax Policies are doing. They have proposed, they have come up with some ground-shaking, transformative proposals. I'm careful to use that word because what they are proposing and submitting for approval or in the form of bills and other policies to the National Assembly is going to do a total overhaul and ground shaking within our fiscal landscape in Nigeria. But that's still a probability. As at this time, we know that there are several oppositions to those proposals, and of course, their sentiments valid to the extent at which they think it is. But if that happens in the positive, we are looking for, I believe that some of the proposals are going to help in putting some level of stability, especially within what happens with data. And all these differences are just some loopholes that is within the revenue management and administration of our tax system within the country. Different institutions managing different things from different angles, and there are no coherence. And so most times we see that amounts to some level of conflict in administration, which causes loopholes, and sometimes we blame it on corruption. But where you don't have a proper plan that puts everything in a streamlined means of administration, well, such must happen, is inevitable. So I'm also going to mention, though the MTEF document is also statutory, I believe, but I would have thought that the Ministry of Finance and Budget would have liaised with these committees, seeing the extent of work they are doing, proposing some transformative changes within the fiscal landscape to see how the alignments can happen within what the MTEF is going to be proposing and what the committee itself is coming up, hoping that if those bills are passed, that they will take effect anytime within the very first quarter of 2025. And my concern will be, or anybody's concern will be, what alignment is going to happen within those proposals and the content of the bills when they turn into law, and what we have within the MTEF and FSP document right now.
Okay, before we get to that point of adjusting some of this to really reflect realities of now or realities of tomorrow by the time we get into 2025, you made mention of revenues. Now, the government have had to borrow 2.2 billion, seeking the National Assembly for approval for 2.2 billion to finance the deficit from the 2024 budget. And going into the 2025 budget, government is actually planning to execute a lot of projects. Now we're talking about these revenue sources. And now at the National Assembly too, we have some of these reforms that are going to aid not just revenue generation, but stabilization. And necessarily, if you look at it, the proposal is about a progressive way of taxation, not taxation in the way it should go. What's your take in how all of this is going and how Nigerians are accepting these reforms at this time?
If I may start with the issue of borrowing, that had been a conversation that had been up for quite a long time now. We have to agree that the way we are going with our borrowing and debt management is not sustainable at all. The MTEF document has reviewed that as at now, the deficit we have is over 30% of the budget itself, which in a simple man's language is that if you have 1,000 naira, that the deficit is more than 300 naira out of the 1,000. So you can't say that you have 1,000 itself. And looking at a projection of borrowing another 9.2 to add to what we have now. And I looked through the MTEF document. What the borrowing is talking about is not capital projects. If you can look through that, it's talking about the changes in the minimum wage, the additions that the minimum wage brought about, debt servicing and pensions. That's indicative that we are not going to borrow for capital projects. Rather, we are going to be borrowing for some recurrent expenditures.
This recurrent expenditures, like you mentioned, we're talking about pensions, talking about staff welfare, the purchasing power of Nigerians have reduced. Yes, these reforms for capital projects, borrowing for capital projects is something that Nigerians have advocated for. It's something that government has been responsive to. But also Nigerians are saying their welfare matters at this point in time, where the civil servant will tell you that his take-home pay is no longer taking him a home. So this borrowing to a very large percentage of the Nigerian sector, for them, it is welcoming. Unlike what they usually know, like, okay, what are we borrowing these monies for? And you agree with me that some say borrowing in itself, it's not a bad idea, but how sustainable? What are we borrowing for? For now, have we gone beyond the threshold, or we are within threshold?
Yes, of course, a long time ago, and that we've been talking about working with the Fiscal Responsibility Commission to peg or help manage, working hand in hand with DMO and the central bank, the extent at which we have gone beyond what the law itself states. And the limit is on one side, which the argument is post-COVID that a lot have changed and put most countries in their street, and some of those limits cannot be, in quotes, adhered to. But even if that is on one side sentimentally accepted, how about the issue around the provision of the law saying that we should not be borrowing for anything other than capital projects? And it's a simple thing to understand that when you borrow to invest in a capital project, that is going to pay itself back. So we are talking about civil welfare. Which one is better? Should
welfare is key. Bassey, Chinedu.
Which one is better?
I'm talking as a beneficiary. Welfare first, then others continue. Government is doing a lot. Thank God for the rail projects we're enjoying. If you're moving to, I remember you do a lot of work around Kaduna. Now moving from Abuja to Kaduna, now you go through the rail. And this rail, the connectivity is not just about Kaduna, Abuja, and about Kaduna to the south, Kaduna to Lagos, Maiduguri, and now to other parts of the country. It's something that has been worked upon. This is a conversation that is continuous. For want of time, I beg for us to take a pause on the discussion. I will continue some other time. Thank you, Bassey Chinedu, for sharing your thoughts with us at this particular point in time.
Thank you for having me.